ex nihilo is a Latin phrase meaning out of nothing. It often appears in conjunction with the concept of creation, as in creatio ex nihilo, meaning creation out of nothing, chiefly in philosophical or theological contexts, but also occurs in other fields. In theology, the common phrase creatio ex nihilo contrasts with creatio ex materia and with creatio ex deo. The phrase ex nihilo also appears in the classical philosophical formulation ex nihilo nihil fit, which means out of nothing comes nothing. Ex nihilo, when used outside of religious or metaphysical contexts, also refers to something coming from nothing. For example, in a conversation, one might raise a topic ex nihilo if it bears no relation to the previous topic of discussion. Another example is fiat currency, as the only thing that gives it value is the consensus belief in it. History of creatio ex nihilo. Ancient Near Eastern mythologies and classical creation myths. In Greek mythology envisioned the creation of the world as resulting from the actions of a god or gods upon already existing primeval matter, known as chaos. An early conflation of Greek philosophy with the narratives in the Hebrew Bible came from Philo of Alexandria, writing in the context of Hellenistic Judaism. Philo equated the Hebrew creator deity Yahweh with Aristotle's prima movens in an attempt to prove that the Jews had held monotheistic views even before the Greeks. However, this was still within the context of creation from pre-existing materials. The classical tradition of creation from chaos first came under question in Hellenistic philosophy, which developed the idea that the prima movens must have created the world out of nothing. Theologians debate whether the Bible itself teaches creation ex nihilo. Traditional interpreters argue on grammatical and syntactical grounds that this is the meaning of Genesis 1:1, which is commonly rendered, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." They further find support for this view in New Testament passages like Hebrews 11:3. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. And Revelation 4:11. For you, God created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. However, other interpreters understand creation ex nihilo as a second-century theological development. According to this view, Church Fathers opposed notions appearing in pre-Christian creation myths and in Gnosticism notions of creation by a demiurge out of a primordial state of matter. Jewish thinkers took up the idea, which became important to Judaism, to ongoing strands in the Christian tradition, and as a corollary to Islam. The first sentence of the Greek version of Genesis in the Septuagint starts with the words, a 1/4 I 1/2 a 1/4 iiaa 1/4 I iii florin I micron I 1/2, translatable as in a beginning he made. A verse of 2 Maccabes expresses the following, I beseech thee, my son, look upon the heaven and the earth, and all that is therein, and consider that God made them of things that were not. And so was mankind made likewise. While those who believe in ex nihilo point to God creating things that were not, those who reject creation out of nothing point out that the context mentions the creation of man, who was made from the dust, and not from absolutely nothing. Many ancient texts tend to have similar issues, and those on each side tend to interpret the text according to their understanding. Max Weber summarizes a sociological view of the overall development and corollaries of the theological idea. As otherworldly expectations become increasingly important, the problem of the basic relationship of God to the world and the problem of the world's imperfections press into the foreground of thought. This happens the more life here on earth comes to be regarded as a merely provisional form of existence when compared to that beyond, the more the world comes to be viewed as something created by God ex nihilo, and therefore subject to decline, the more God himself is conceived as a subject to transcendental goals and values, and the more a person's behavior in this world becomes oriented to his fate in the next. Theological usage, approaches favoring ex nihilo creation, logical approaches, not all ex nihilo thought assumes a divinely revealed creator. A major argument for creatio ex nihilo, the first cause argument, states in summary, everything that begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore, the universe must have a cause. Another argument for ex nihilo creation comes from Claude Noel's Summum philosophy that states before anything existed, nothing existed, and if nothing existed, then it must have been possible for nothing to be. If it is possible for nothing to be, then it must be possible for everything to be. Other support for creatio ex nihilo belief comes from the idea that something cannot arise from nothing. That would involve a contradiction. Therefore something must always have existed. But it is scientifically impossible for matter to always have existed. Moreover, matter is contingent, it is not logically impossible for it not to exist, and nothing else depends on it. Hence one deduces a creator, non-contingent and not composed of matter. Ancient Greek speculation. Some scholars have argued that Platon viewed Plato as positing ex nihilo creation in his Timaeus. Eric Voegelin detects in Hesiod's Chaos a creatio ex nihilo. The school of Chartres understood the creation account in Plato's Timaeus to refer to creatio ex nihilo. Islamic views, early Islamic philosophy, as well as key Muslim schools of thought, have argued a wide array of views, the basis always being that the Creator was an eternal being who was outside of the creation, and was not a part of creation. Several schools of thought stemming from the first cause argument, and a great deal of philosophical works from Muslim scholars such as al-Ghazali, came from the following verses in the Quran. The following quotations come from Muhammad Assad's translation, The Message of the Quran, 52:35. Were they created by nothing? Or were they themselves the creators? 117. The originator is he of the heavens and the earth, and when he wills a thing to be, he but says unto it, be a and it is. 1967. But does man not bear in mind that we have created him aforetime while at one point they were nothing? 2130. Then, they who are bent on denying the truth, not aware that the heavens and the earth were, once one single entity, which we then parted asunder. And, that we made out of water every living thing? Will they not, then, begin to believe? 2156. He answered, Nay, but your true sustainer is the sustainer of the heavens and the earth, he who has brought them into being, and I am one of those who bear witness to this truth. 35:1. All praise is due to God, originator of the heavens and the earth, who causes the angels to be message bearers, endowed with wings, 2, or 3, or 4. He adds to his creation whatever he wills, for, verily, God is most competent over all things. 51:47. It is we who have built the heaven with power. And, verily, it is we who are steadily expanding it. Christian theologians, biblical scholars and theologians within the Christian tradition such as Augustine, John Calvin, John Wesley and Matthew Henry cite Genesis 1:1 in support of the idea of divine creation out of nothing. Some of the early Christian church fathers with a Platonic background argued that the act of creation itself involved pre-existent matter, but made that matter in turn to have been created out of nothing. Hindu, Rig Veda quotes, if in the beginning there was neither being nor non-being, neither air nor sky, what was there? Who or what oversaw it? What was it when there was no darkness, light, life, or death? We can only say that there was the one, that which breathed of itself deep in the void, that which was heat and became desire and the germ of spirit. Which is suggestive of the fact that ex nihilo creator was always there and he is not controlled by time or by any previous creation. Modern physics. A widely supported scientific theory in modern physics is the zero-energy universe, which states that the total amount of energy in the universe is exactly zero. That is the only kind of universe that could come from nothing. Such a universe would have to be flat in shape, a state which does not contradict current observations that the universe is flat with a 0.5% margin of error. The paper, OE Spontaneous Creation of the Universe ex nihilo, shows how the universe was created from pure nothing, unregistered trademark in information terms. Arguments against ex nihilo creation. Logical approaches against ex nihilo. The first cause argument was rooted in ancient Greek philosophy and based in observation in physics. Originally it was understood in the context of creation from chaos. The observed phenomenon seen in reality is that nothing moves by itself. In other words, motion is not self-caused, thus the classic Greek thinkers argued that the cosmos must have had a prime mover prima movens. However, this scientific observation of motion does not logically extend to the idea of existence, and therefore does not necessarily indicate creation from absolutely nothing. In theology, ex nihilo creation states that there was a beginning to one's existence, and anything that exists has a beginning. This idea of a required beginning appears to contradict the proposed creator who existed without a beginning. In other words, people are considered to be contingent beings and their existence depends upon a non-contingent being. However, if non-contingency is possible, then there is no basis for arguing that contingency is required for existence, nor can it be logically concluded that the number of non-contingent beings or non-contingent things is limited to one. This logic, however, is a misunderstanding of theological arguments. Such arguments make a distinction between existence and creation. By definition, everything that is creation must have a creator. However, not all that exists was created. Generally, monotheistic arguments do not posit that all things have a beginning, rather that all things which have a beginning must also have a source or cause. Because the universe has an apparent beginning, it must also therefore have a transcendent cause. David Ray Griffin expressed his thoughts on this as follows: "No special philosophical problems are raised by this view, if it is intelligible to hold that the existence of God requires no explanation, since something must exist necessarily and of itself, then it is not unintelligible to hold that that which exists necessarily is God and a realm of non-divine actualities." Theologically based arguments generally bypass these objections through the presumption of omnipotence. Opposition within modern Christian theology. Bruce K. Waltke wrote an extensive biblical study of creation theology that argues creation from chaos rather than nothing based on the Hebrew Torah and the New Testament texts. This work was published by the Western Conservative Baptist Seminary in 1974 and again in 1981. On a historical basis, many scholars agree that the doctrine of creatio ex nihilo was not the original intent of the biblical authors, but instead a change in the interpretation of the texts which began to evolve in the mid-2nd century AD in the atmosphere of Hellenistic philosophy. The idea solidified around 200 AD in arguments and in response to the Gnostics, Stoics, and Middle Platonists. Thomas J. Oud, a Christian philosopher and theologian, argues that Christians should abandon the doctrine of creation ex nihilo. Oud points to the work of biblical scholars, such as John D. Levinson, who points out that the doctrine of creatio ex nihilo does not appear in Genesis. Oud speculates that God created our particular universe billions of years ago from primordial chaos. This chaos did not predate God, however, for God would have created the chaotic elements as well. Oud suggests that God can create all things without creating from absolute nothingness. Oud offers 9 objections to creatio ex nihilo. Theoretical problem: one cannot conceive absolute nothingness. Biblical problem: Scripture in Genesis, 2 Peter, and elsewhere suggests creation from something, not creation from absolutely nothing. Historical problem: the Gnostics Basilites and Valentinus first proposed creatio ex nihilo on the basis of assuming the inherently evil nature of creation, and in the belief that God does not act in history. Early Christian theologians adopted the idea to affirm the kind of absolute divine power that many Christians now reject. Empirical problem: we have no evidence that our universe originally came into being from absolutely nothing. Creation at an instant problem: we have no evidence in the history of the universe after the Big Bang that entities can emerge instantaneously from absolute nothingness. As the earliest philosophers noted, out of nothing comes nothing. Solitary power problem: creatio ex nihilo assumes that a powerful God once acted alone. But power, as a social concept, only becomes meaningful in relation to others. Errant revelation problem: the God with the capacity to create something from absolutely nothing would apparently have the power to guarantee an unambiguous and inerrant message of salvation. An unambiguously clear and inerrant divine revelation does not exist. Problem of evil: if God once had the power to create from absolutely nothing, God essentially retains that power. But a God of love with this capacity appears culpable for failing to prevent evil. Empire problem: The kind of divine power implied in creatio ex nihilo supports a theology of empire, based upon unilateral force and control of others. Process theologians argue that humans have always related a god to some or another. They also claim that rejecting creatio ex nihilo provides the opportunity to affirm that God has everlastingly created and related with some realm of non-divine actualities or another. According to this alternative God-world theory, no non-divine thing exists without the creative activity of God, and nothing can terminate God's necessary existence. Some non-Trinitarian Christian churches do not teach the ex nihilo doctrine. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints teaches that Jehovah, under the direction of God the Father, organized this world and others like it out of eternal, pre-existing materials. The first prophet of the religion, Joseph Smith, explained the LDS view as follows: "Now, the word create does not mean to create out of nothing. It means to organize. God had materials to organize the world out of chaos. The pure principles of element are principles which can never be destroyed. They may be organized and reorganized, but not destroyed. They had no beginning and can have no end. An ongoing debate exists on the issue of creation ex nihilo versus creation ex materia between evangelical authors Paul Copan and William Lane Craig and LDS Mormon apologist Blake Osler. Jehovah's Witnesses teach that God used the energy he possesses to create the universe based on the statement at Isaiah 40:26. They point out that this harmonizes with the scientific idea of the relationship between matter and energy. They distinguish Jehovah from Jesus Christ, teaching that before he created the physical universe, Jehovah created Jesus and that Michael is the heavenly form of Jesus. Hindu views. The Vedanta schools of Hinduism reject the concept of creation ex nihilo for several reasons. For example, both types of revelatory texts designate matter as eternal although completely dependent on God the absolute truth. Believers then have to attribute all the evil ingrained in material life to God, making him partial and arbitrary, which does not logically accord with his nature. The Bhagavad Gita states the eternality of matter and its transformability clearly and succinctly. Material nature and the living entities should be understood to be beginningless. Their transformations and the modes of matter are products of material nature. The opening words of Krishna in BG 2.12-13 also imply this, as do the doctrines referred to in BG 16.8 as explained by the commentator Vaidya Tirtha. Most philosophical schools in Hinduism maintain that material creation started with some minute particle which had to be co-eternal or a part of ultimate reality. This minute starting point is also the point into which all creation contracts at the end of each cycle. This concept varies between various traditions such as the Vishishtadvaita tradition that asserts that the universe is part of God and created from some aspect of his divinity, and Tamil Shaiva Siddhanta traditions which state that the minute initial particle has always existed and was never created. See also, Archbishop Usher, who authored a chronology for the creation, Usher Chronology. Big Bang, Creation according to Genesis, Emergence, Ex Nihilo Nihil Fit, Ex Nihilo. Infinite Regression, M-Theory, Mormon Cosmology, Mormon Metaphysics, Mormon Thought on Ex Nihilo Creation, Natural Theology, Nihilism, Rabbinical Creation Story, Thomas J. Oud, Turtles All the Way Down, Notes. Further reading, Jeremiah Benes and Michael Kumhoff. The Chicago Plan Revisited of the Challenges Resulting from Ex Nihilo Banking Practices and Their Apparent Solutions. Monique Terrazas. Discovering the Money Tree. Go to page 15. Charles Bean. Bank of England Bulletin 2008 Q1 especially page 103 bottom left, on money creation, Thomas J. Oud. The Nature of Love, A Theology. St. Louis, ShalisaPress.com. John D. Levinson, Creation and the Persistence of Evil, The Jewish Drama of Divine Omnipotence. Stuart L. Bonting, Chaos Theology. A Revised Creation Theology, Ottawa, Novalis, 2002. Hutchinson, James Edward. Pandemonium Tremendum, Chaos and Mystery in the Life of God. Cleveland, Ohio, Pilgrim Press. ISBN A0-8298-1419-1. David Ray Griffin, Creation Out of Chaos and the Problem of Evil in Davis, Stephen T., ed. 1981. Encountering Evil, Live Options in Theodicy. Louisville, Kentucky, Westminster John Knox Press. ISBN A0-664-22251 Exer, Keller, Catherine. Face of the Deep, A Theology of Becoming. Routledge. ISBN A978-0-415-25649-0. Retrieved October 4, 2009. Lodal, Michael E. Creation Out of Nothing? Or Is Next to Nothing Enough? In Stone, Brian P. Yude, Thomas J. Thy Nature and Thy Name is Love, Wesleyan and Process Theologies in Dialogue. Nashville, Kingwood. ISBN A0-687-05220-3. Thiessen, Gerd. Translated by John Bowden, 1987. The Shadow of the Galilean, The Quest of the Historical Jesus in Narrative Form. Minneapolis, Minnesota, Fortress Press. ISBN A978-0-8006-3900-6A.